The millisecond that changes everything. She stared at her phone screen, watching her own hand reach for it again before she even knew why. The decision had already been made. Somewhere deeper than thought, faster than awareness, her brain had chosen for her. This happens to all of us, every single day. We blame willpower, we call it weakness. We think if we just tried harder, pushed more, disciplined ourselves better, we'd finally get control. But what if the problem wasn't you at all? What if everything you thought about self-control, stress, and exhaustion was built on a fundamental misunderstanding of how your brain actually works? Scientists at MIT discovered something unsettling. Your brain makes decisions about 300 milliseconds before you consciously know you've decided anything. 0.3 of a second. A blink takes longer. In that invisible gap, your nervous system is already moving, aching, avoiding, craving, shutting down. You experience the feeling as choice, but the architecture beneath it was built long before this moment. And when that system gets dysregulated, even slightly, everything starts to unravel. Dr. Sarah Chen didn't realize how deep the problem went until she found herself crying in her car after a routine appointment. Nothing traumatic had happened. No crisis, just everything, all at once, and no capacity left to hold it. She was a neurologist. She understood the brain academically, but understanding didn't stop the exhaustion that arrived without warning, the irritability that felt foreign in her own body, the way small decisions, what to eat, which route to take, suddenly felt impossible. I kept thinking I just needed rest, she told me later. But rest didn't fix it. Sleep didn't fix it. I'd wake up already tired. What Sarah was experiencing wasn't burnout in the traditional sense. It was something more fundamental, a timing error in her nervous system's ability to regulate itself. Your brain operates on microsecond precision. When a stressor appears, your autonomic nervous system, the part you don't consciously control, responds instantly. Heart rate shifts, cortisol releases, blood flow redirects. All of this happens before you even register the thought, I'm stressed. Under normal conditions, this system recalibrates just as quickly. Threat passes, recovery begins, balance restores. But when the timing gets disrupted, when your nervous system stays activated just a fraction too long, or recovers just a fraction too slow, the effects compound. Researchers at Stanford mapped this phenomenon using real-time neural imaging. They found that people experiencing chronic stress, fatigue, or impulse control issues didn't have fundamentally different brains. They had timing errors. The signal to stand down after stress would arrive late. The signal to engage before action would fire prematurely. Milliseconds of mistiming, repeated thousands of times a day, across weeks and months. The body kept score in ways consciousness couldn't track. We're not talking about damage, one researcher explained. We're talking about drift. Like a clock that's 2 minutes slow, you don't notice it until you've missed the train. Sarah started tracking her own patterns. Not her thoughts or moods, those felt too subjective, but her body's responses. Heart rate variability. Sleep architecture. How long it took her nervous system to calm after a minor frustration. The data revealed something she hadn't consciously noticed. Her recovery time was getting longer. A stressful email used to spike her heart rate for maybe 90 seconds. Now it was 5 minutes, 10. Sometimes it never fully dropped before the next trigger arrived. It was like my system forgot how to shift gears, she said. I was stuck in a state that felt normal because I'd been living in it so long. Part of her wondered if this was just aging, just life. Maybe everyone felt this way and she was the only one complaining. But the science told a different story. When researchers examined nervous system timing across different populations, they found something consistent. The people who reported the highest levels of fatigue, stress sensitivity, and impulse control issues weren't necessarily facing more stress than others. They were facing normal stress with a dysregulated response system. Think about it like this. Imagine your brain is a thermostat trying to maintain 68 degrees. A little heat comes in, the system adjusts. A little cold, it compensates. The house stays comfortable. Now imagine the thermostat starts lagging. Heat arrives, but the cooling doesn't kick in for an extra 3 minutes. The temperature climbs to 73, then 75. By the time the system responds, you're overheated and now it overcorrects, plunging you down to 62. You're not broken. The mechanism is just mistime. And your conscious mind experiences this mistiming as, why can't I handle things anymore? Why am I so reactive? Why do I feel exhausted for no reason? Dr. Andrew Huberman, a neuroscientist at Stanford, describes this as a threshold shift. Your nervous system's baseline, the place it considers neutral, has quietly moved. What used to feel calm now registers as slightly threatening. What used to feel energizing now feels overwhelming. You're not weaker. The calibration changed. And here's what makes it so insidious. You adapt to the new baseline. You don't realize how far you've drifted until something forces you to notice. For Sarah, that moment came during a hike with her daughter. They'd done this trail 100 times. Easy gradient, familiar turns. Halfway up, her daughter asked, "Mom, "Are you okay? You seem really tense." Sarah hadn't felt tense, she felt normal. But her jaw was clenched, her shoulders were up near her ears, her breathing was shallow. She'd been holding her body like she was bracing for impact in a peaceful trail, in beautiful weather, doing something she loved. "That's when I realized," she said. "This wasn't a bad day. This was my new default." The human nervous system evolved for a very different world. Acute threats, clear dangers. Sprint from the predator, rest by the fire, repeat as needed. Modern life doesn't work that way. The threats are chronic, ambiguous, unresolvable. Email, traffic, the news, social comparison, financial pressure. Your nervous system treats all of it the same way it would treat a predator. Activate, mobilize, prepare. Except there's nothing to fight, nothing to flee, just ... continuation. Researchers call this allostatic load, the cumulative wear of staying activated without resolution. Like revving your car engine while the brake is on. The system works exactly as designed, but the context it's designed for no longer exists. Sarah started experimenting with what she called micro-resets. Not meditation retreats or week-long vacations, those felt impossibly distant. Just small, deliberate moments where she could signal to her nervous system, "We're safe, we can stand down." 2 minutes of slow breathing after a tense meeting. A 30-second pause before responding to a stressful text. A conscious unclenching of her jaw while sitting in traffic. It felt absurd at first. Almost embarrassingly simple. But something started to shift. What surprised her most wasn't just how quickly her body responded to these small interventions. It was how much she'd been missing by never pausing at all. She started noticing the exact moment her shoulders would rise when her phone buzzed. The way her breath would catch before a difficult conversation. The split-second tension that would arrive before she even read a message. These weren't conscious choices. They were automatic responses, firing on microsecond timing, below the threshold of awareness. But by catching them, just noticing, she could introduce a gap, a moment where choice could exist. Neuroscientists at the University of Wisconsin studied this phenomenon in people practicing what they called attentional check-ins, not meditation, not mindfulness in the traditional sense. Just brief moments of noticing body state throughout the day. What they found was remarkable. Even 5 seconds of deliberate noticing could interrupt the automatic stress response cascade. Heart rate variability improved. Cortisol patterns stabilized. And over time, the nervous system's timing started to recalibrate. The mistiming didn't disappear entirely, but it narrowed. Instead of a 5-minute stress response, it became 3 minutes, then 90 seconds. The system was learning to shift gears again. Sarah wasn't expecting such a clear change. She'd tried so many approaches before: APS, supplements, therapy, exercise, routines, and, while some helped, nothing addressed what she now understood was the core issue. Her nervous system had lost its rhythm. What worked wasn't adding more, it was creating space. Tiny gaps where her biology could remember how to regulate itself. She started sharing her experience with patients. Not as medical advice, she was careful about that, but as someone who'd lived it. Many of them reported similar patterns. The creeping fatigue, the hair trigger reactivity, the sense that their emotional bandwidth had somehow shrunk. "It's not in your head," she'd tell them. "It's in your timing. This isn't a story about perfection or transformation in 10 days. Sarah still has hard moments. Weeks where everything feels heavier than it should. But now she has language for what's happening, and tools that actually address the mechanism underneath. The invisible gap between stimulus and response, 300 milliseconds where your nervous system decides before you do that. Gap is where everything happens. And when the timing in that gap goes off, even by milliseconds, the whole system starts to struggle. Researchers are now exploring whether this timing drift might explain why so many modern interventions for stress and fatigue show mixed results. We've been treating symptoms: exhaustion, anxiety, impulse control, as separate issues, but they might all be expressions of the same underlying problem, a nervous system operating out of sync with itself. When you can't regulate your state, everything gets harder. Decision-making, emotional control, physical recovery. Not because you're weak, but because the system that manages those functions is mistimed. There's a moment Sarah describes from about 6 months into her own recalibration. She was in a staff meeting that would have normally set her on edge: difficult personalities, competing agendas, too many voices. She felt the familiar tensions start to rise. But then something different happened. Her system caught itself. Not consciously, she didn't think her way through it, but somewhere below awareness, her nervous system recognized the pattern and adjusted. The tension peaked and then ... released. On its own, she laughed quietly to herself, realizing, this is what normal used to feel like. If you've been wondering why rest doesn't restore you anymore, why small things feel overwhelming, why you can't seem to get back to your old baseline, it might not be about what you're doing wrong. It might be about timing that's drifted so gradually, you didn't notice until the gap became a canyon. The good news: timing can recalibrate. Nervous systems can learn new patterns, Even after years of dysregulation, it doesn't happen overnight, but it happens in moments, small, deliberate, repeated moments where you teach your body it's allowed to stand down. What Sarah found most helpful wasn't a single technique, but a shift in understanding. She stopped treating her exhaustion and reactivity as personal failures and started treating them as signals. Data points from a system trying to communicate in the only language it has: sensation. When she approached her own experience with curiosity instead of judgment, what is my nervous system trying to tell me right now? The whole landscape changed. The tension in her chest wasn't weakness, it was information. The urge to scroll her phone wasn't lack of discipline. It was a dysregulated system, seeking relief in the only way it knew how. Understanding that didn't make the feelings disappear, but it changed her relationship to them. And that changed everything. We live in a culture that prizes override, push through, mind over matter, discipline over discomfort. But your nervous system doesn't work that way. It operates on ancient, non-negotiable principles: detect, respond, regulate, restore. When any part of that cycle gets disrupted, the whole system suffers, and no amount of willpower can think it back into alignment. You can't discipline your way out of dysregulation. You can only recalibrate. Sarah still works full days, still navigates stress and complexity and difficult emotions, but now there's a rhythm to it, a sense that her system is working with her instead of against her. She describes it like this: before, I felt like I was constantly fighting myself. Every day was a battle between what I wanted to do and what my body would allow. Now there's cooperation. I'm tired when it makes sense to be tired. I'm energized when I need to be. It's not perfect, but it's coherent. That coherence, that sense of internal alignment, might be the thing we're all searching for when we talk about balance, wellness, resilience. Not some external achievement. Just a nervous system that remembers how to time itself. When she looked at herself now, not in a mirror, but in the quality of her days, what had changed wasn't her circumstances. It was her capacity. The internal space she had to meet whatever came. And that space wasn't built through force or discipline. It was reclaimed through attention. Millisecond by millisecond, one micro reset at a time. Tell us what part of this story resonated most with your own experience. Have you noticed your own baseline shifting? How do you know when your nervous system is out of sync? And let us know what country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video. Bye.